Hello. Welcome everyone to today's webcast, which is being broadcast live from DistribuTECH. It's brought to you by PowerGrid International Magazine, and today's event is titled Building Smart Communities, Strengthening Utility and City Partnerships. Our panelists today are Rob Focus, Energy and Sustainability Manager for the City of Charlotte, Sherilyn Moore, who is Senior Vice President of Network Solutions for Itron, and Jim Ogle, who's Senior Manager of Network Engineering at Avista. And the webcast is being sponsored by Itron. So we have a live audience, obviously, here at DistribuTECH, and we also have an online audience. So before we get started, I need to go over just a few housekeeping items with everyone. Some of them will apply to those of you who are online, some just to those of you in the audience, and some to everybody. So first of all, for those of you online, the presentation is both live and interactive, so you can ask a question at any time by clicking on the Ask a Question button in the presentation window. What we're going to do, we're going to have a panel discussion here, and when our discussion is concluded, we're going to kind of frame some of the major issues with smart cities. Then we will open the discussion up for our audience. So those of you online, you can put your question in at any time, but we will address that question after our panel has had their initial discussion. And for those of you in the audience who want to ask a question, we will have someone with a microphone. So we ask that you please don't ask your question until you have a microphone in hand, because that's the only way that our online audience will be able to hear your questions. So also, for those of you online, if you have any technical difficulties, you can use that same Ask a Question feature, and someone from our technical staff will address that with you, hopefully, and get that straightened out. If you have any pop-up blocking software running, you need to close that down, and also anything on your computer that you might not need to have open right now, I recommend that you go ahead and close that down. So the next announcement pertains to everybody. If you had your badge scanned when you walked in, or if you registered online, you will receive notice of the archived version of this webcast. It will be archived on the PowerGrid page, the PowerGrid web page, and within 24 hours. So you will get an email telling you that it's there. It will give you a link to get to the archived webcast. And also, for those of you who may have peers that didn't get to come to DistribuTECH, or someone else that you think would benefit from the webcast, you can share that link with them, or you can just tell them to go to the PowerGrid International website, and they will be able to view the webcast also for the next 6 months. So it'll be up there for 6 months. So I think that's it for the housekeeping items. As I mentioned, we're going to have a brief panel discussion, and then we're going to open it up for discussion for everyone. So I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists today. And right here on my left is Sherilyn Moore from Itron. And Sherilyn has more than 20 years of experience in the energy and technology sectors. She is currently Itron's Senior Vice President of Network Solutions. In this role, she's responsible for Itron's networking platforms and smart city strategies globally. And she previously was Vice President of Global Marketing and Public Affairs for Itron. She's also served in a variety of product and marketing-related roles during her more than 15 years at Itron. Next to her, we have Rob Focus, who is the Energy and Sustainability Manager for the City of Charlotte, North Carolina. And he is serving an organization of 7,000-plus staff and a city of nearly 800,000 people. He supports a variety of internal and external programs in the energy, sustainability, and smart city spaces. And he plays an important role in the community, supporting energy and sustainability conversations by connecting and facilitating collaboration and innovation between academic, utility, business, and government entities. And we're going to discuss the importance of that in just a few minutes. And then on the end, to his left, is Jim Ogle, who is Senior Manager of Network Engineering at Avista, where he's responsible for architecture and design of the network system across the enterprise. And he participates in Avista's research and innovation projects, including Spokane's Smart City Initiative, which is called Urbanova, where he serves as the chair of the Network Architecture Working Group. Jim has 25 years of broad industry experience spanning distribution and substation engineering at Puget Sound Energy and network system R&D at Agilent Technologies. Is that right, Agilent? Agilent Technologies and Itron. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with our discussion. So first of all, smart cities kind of means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Similar to smart grid, maybe 10 years ago when smart grid was a very popular term, you could ask someone what smart grid meant and you got a lot of different answers. And now we kind of see the same happening with smart cities. So I wanted to start out by just asking each of our panelists kind of how they define smart cities and maybe what are some of the main characteristics of a smart city. So Sherilyn, you want to go first?
Sure. Itron has been long involved in one of the earliest pioneering organizations with the smart city collaboration. And early on defined smart city as the ability to provide connected devices across a city that would bring new insights and information back, that information that could be used together in new ways across silos of traditional cities, really for the intent of purpose of driving economic vitality in a city, for improving sustainability, as well as improving the overall life and quality of life of citizens. So from our vantage point, we try to talk about it in that way and to remain consistent with how the SCC has defined it over the course of time. But it is widely used of anything that's done that could be quantified as smart, could be called. We've been doing smart cities for years, so there is a pretty wide distribution of how the term is used.
Yeah, we define it as using data, technology, and collaboration to address our community's opportunities and challenges. It's a very broad term. I think it means a lot of things to different people. Even that is a really broad term. But from the public servant perspective, in looking at that definition, for me, one of the most important pieces is the collaborative piece, and we'll talk more about that later. But I think in the time that I've been doing this, we've seen the evolution from it really being a technology-focused area to a people-focused area, and that's represented in a lot of work that we do.
Yeah, well, I think I would echo Sherilyn and Rob here that it is a very broad term, and I think that's because it isn't really one thing. It's to me, it's more of a philosophy of bringing, improving the communities where we all live, and making it, healthier, safer, environmentally sound, economically vital. And to do that, we're doing things like the new technologies, bringing things connected, so that we can have the devices out there, have the awareness of what's going on, make them work together, and then collaborating across the people that are part of the community. So the city, the utility, the industry, working together. So.
All right. Let me back up for a second. And Jim and Rob, I know you're involved in each of your own smart city program or project. Why don't you, just so our audience knows, why don't you just each of you give us just a little brief overview of what your initiative is all about?
You go first this time.
Okay, sure. So I'm part of the Smart City initiative that we have in the city of Spokane, which is called Urbanova. And it's a collection of partners that founded this initiative with the city of Spokane, Avista Utilities, Itron, McKinstry, their building company, and some of the universities in the area of Spokane. And so this group has come together and formed to do the type of things that we just talked about, and have created a series of a focus area, and are working on a number of projects, collaborating to do things, looking at smart city, smart street lights, smart energy, and really looking at what are the different opportunities that we can work together on to try to advance the Smart City initiative and treat this as a living laboratory where we can rapidly come together and learn from different things to get to those great new applications that are going to drive the benefits of a smart city.
Yeah, there are two projects that I wanted to mention. The first one was really how Charlotte got involved in smart cities before the term really caught fire, and that's Envision Charlotte. And it was started several years ago, and the focus of it, the goal of Envision Charlotte, was to make Center City Charlotte the most environmentally sustainable center city or urban core in the country by focusing on model projects in energy, air, water, and waste. Energy was really the first one out of the gate, where the goal was to reduce energy use by 20% over 5 years in our biggest buildings in Charlotte. And we partnered with Duke Energy, Cisco, and Verizon on that. And then we had a similar goal around water, where Itron was our partner. And that was really the first time where we brought together this collaborative of public, private, nonprofit, and academic to start solving environmental sustainability problems. And that really turned into lots of different projects, internal, external to the city. The one that's captured most of my attention now is a project called the North End Smart District, which is a 3.1 square mile area on the north side of town, where we're looking to economically revitalize the area and improve the quality of life of the residents on the smart city platform. So again, the data, the technology, and the collaboration. And fundamental to this is working very closely with the neighborhood leaders and the neighborhoods to truly understand what they're looking for. So our motto is to build with our residents and not for our residents. We don't want to bring in technology that doesn't serve their needs, even though it might serve another neighborhood's needs. So we're very, very deliberative in how we work through the projects that we're doing. And I'll have an opportunity to talk some more about those later.
All right, great. Well, as we mentioned earlier, often one of the greatest challenges with Smart City is getting all those different organizations to collaborate together. Like you said, you have to have financing, you have to have the technology and the interoperability between that technology, and then, of course, just collaboration among a lot of different siloed groups, even sometimes within the city itself. So do you guys want to talk a little bit about maybe how you've tackled that? What are some of the biggest challenges you've faced so far?
I'll start with, there's a theme of where we're seeing traction, and there's a common theme between, I think, both of the projects that Rob and Jim just highlighted, in that what brings them together was really innovative leadership at the beginning, at the very top of the city. Jim Rogers with Envision Charlotte and Scott Morris of Avista, both the CEOs of Duke and Avista, having the foresight to say, we can't run this as a utility, but we can be a catalyst to create something great. And I think that really is what ended up becoming Envision Charlotte and Urbanova, that truly have become entities with the entire goal of bringing together collaboration across key stakeholders to make something happen. So really what seemed to work in these cases is that visionary leadership up front, but then establishing an organization to really foster and lead a cross-collaborative initiative on behalf of the city. So I think that's one of the things that we've seen as being a great way or great catalyst to be able to do this, is you have to dedicate the people and you have to make it a priority.
I think one of the challenges is related to the first question you asked, which is, what is smart cities? Right, so it's kind of the Wild West, and depending on who you talk to, it means different things. So that was one challenge really early on, was, what are you talking about? Well, first of all, when you're a sustainability director, you often get that question. So now it's, you're bringing a whole new term in. So I think we've gotten most people on board there. And then I think you point out another big challenge, which is it's a cross-silo effort. And you need that leadership, and you also need those champions. So being able to find the champion in the organization or in the department, if it's internal, is a big challenge. And the last challenge I'll mention is that a lot of these projects aren't quickly done, especially when you're dealing with new technologies that are changing. There's a long window in which you have to get this work done. So keeping people interested, keeping people at the table, finding new champions when the old champions leave. So it's a lot of that communication, that connection, the silo busting.
Yeah, and I think after you have the vision from the thought leaders, and you come in and look around the organization, and you get the actual structure and focus that you need. The next challenge that I see and that we're looking at Urbanova is kind of the business model, the financing, the organization. How do you push these ideas and make them into a reality? And again, through partnerships and cooperations, we're making the projects a reality. But in the long term, I think that's where there's going to be a lot of innovation that comes around. How do we collectively push the transformation that we need to have?
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about smart grid technology and utilities. I mean, given that smart grid technology, which most utilities or many utility companies are adopting, requires reliable connectivity, there's an increasing need for communication networks to support that and to support the use cases beyond traditional just smart metering. So the lines between network providers and utilities are blurring, and it's trending toward utility as the provider of the robust and interoperable network. So, Sherilyn, I'll start with you. What do you envision the relationship between the smart network providers and the electric utilities to be in the future?
As a network provider, what is absolutely critical is we think about the technology that we're providing as a platform that enables not only what it's initially intended to do, but enables the things that we can't think of today. We need it to be multi-purpose, meaning you can do different things with that network. It needs to be open and interoperable so that not only the utilities have choice, but the cities have choice, that citizens will have choice, that other technology providers can participate. So it needs to be open, it needs to be interoperable. You need to have the performance and the speed and the bandwidth capability to enable applications that we can't envision today. So you have to future-proof that investment by having the capabilities and the throughput and the memory to be able to extend capabilities into the future. And ultimately, you need to be able to bring the cost down. For the business model challenge that Jim mentioned, it's imperative that you can create multiple value streams on an infrastructure investment. So looking at ways that it can be affordable not only to the utility, but affordable to smaller cities that want to lead. It's not always the electricity utility, but it's the city in some cases, and maybe it's not energy or water, maybe it's street lighting that are those key first applications. So being able to have the business model and the technology at the right cost point so that it's accessible and affordable. Those are the few things that are incredibly important as you create that enabling infrastructure.
All right.
Yeah, and I think that's a good description. And the things that you mentioned there really point to the need for dynamic and diverse capabilities within the network connectivity model we have for a very wide range of smart city use cases. The certain the performance requirements for one type of sensor may be vastly different than those for a different type of sensor. And with a dynamic nature like that, I think we're going to see the model between a network provider, traditional network provider, and the utility is going to be less of a supplier-buyer type of relationship and more of a partnership type arrangement. There won't be one network that can meet all the different use cases, and there won't be one network that's operated by one entity. That through that partnership and collaboration, we will need to have a prudent selection of what's the best connectivity model for the particular device or use case or service that we're trying to support. And those service providers, the utilities, the technology providers are all going to have to work together as we manage that.
Yeah, and as the network provider working with utilities, it's that flexibility of what makes sense. What service do you need? A service? Do you need technology? Do you need? How do we partner to make these things happen? And that flexibility. As a longtime technology provider, we're increasingly becoming a service provider and a partner to our utilities. So it means a lot of different things based on what the business model is. But we're adapting very quickly as utilities are adapting as well.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, back to the collaboration. I mean, we talked, obviously, you have to have a leader, someone to really champion this, or probably several someones to really champion this, not just one leader, but several strong leaders. But Rob, can you tell us a little bit about, in the city of Charlotte, what has been your strategy to kind of bring the public and private sectors together. And again, the collaboration with the technology providers as well as some of those private and public.
Well, it really, it all builds out of our experience that we had with Envision Charlotte, which was, you mentioned earlier, was really the vision of Jim Rogers looking to do a legacy project in Charlotte. But early on, there was a recognition that to achieve that goal and others, that it just couldn't be done alone. We like to talk about Charlotte having a spirit of collaboration and partnership, which we do, and I think that led to the ability to get interested, excited people to the table early on, and we really built off that. So early on in our meetings with Envision Charlotte, we had the private sector, the public sector, the academic sector, and the nonprofit sector all represented, and it worked extremely well. So as we move forward in the smart city space, be it internally or externally, we just look to always replicate that model. And there might be, for different projects, for different programs, some partners are going to have a bigger role than others, but I think you need to start off at least touching all those different groups and just always checking to see, are all the proper voices in the room? And I think with the Smart District that we're working on, really getting that public voice to the table has been instrumental to what we're doing, and has really provided a ton of insight into the work we're doing, from the language that we're using, to the border that we've chosen, to the projects that we're focused on that we thought would be longer term that they wanted to make short term. So it's a lot of work. You definitely need someone who likes to talk, which I obviously do, and to communicate, because you have to build relationships. There's a ton of trust that's involved, especially because these are longer term projects. So you need to go in, I think, with an understanding of you need to have a really large table that for certain situations you might shrink a bit, and be willing to communicate and communicate frequently with people.
Okay. All right. Well, so obviously part of that, the whole collaboration involves consumers or the customers, and I know you've already mentioned that different pockets of the city may have different needs. So let's talk a little bit about the consumer demand for smart homes, renewable energy, maybe even electric vehicles, all these different things that are beginning to show up in utilities spaces and obviously in cities. So is this shifting dynamic having any impact on the current business models that you guys have been working with? And how is data from some of these different things impacting your projects or your initiatives?
Sure. I think for the electric utility industry, we're going through a significant transformation at this point in time, and the use of distributed energy, electric vehicles, are part of that, and it has a fairly significant impact on the way that we plan and build and operate, an electrical grid. And from if you look at this from a short-term standpoint, the first challenge is the existing system was built on a centralized generation model. We operate along that way for many years, right? So with the DERs, the distributed energy resources, we have to change that model. We now have generation distributed throughout our territory. We've got generation that's behind the meter that we don't have the same type of visibility that we would have with the systems that we built around transmission and the generation in the centralized model. So we need to increase our situational awareness out on the distribution side. So connected sensors, we need to have those devices working together so that they can rapidly respond out into to the environments that are happening out there, which is, lots of the technology that's being used for smart cities is also applicable in the energy delivery system of the future.
Okay.
One of the advantages of many of the smart city deployments we're seeing is they are living laboratories, such that you can test and you can bring in partners and see what kind of programs work, what does encourage conservation behavior, how could an EV project work, what about smart irrigation or smart water, and what are the impacts, and you can do that in an environment with the spirit of collaboration and with an intent to then how do we scale it as a city. The Dallas Innovation Alliance of Dallas is working on their smart city project, and they're 18 months in, and they're on a pretty rapid track. They just kicked off their phase 1A to go after smart irrigation and smart water and putting metrics in place. And their goal of the DIA is, okay, let's do this here in this contained environment with a plan of what is the financial model and ability to scale it across the city. So smart cities can also be, your question was, what does this mean, the transformation and enabling business model? Smart cities can be a bridge to figuring out those broader city or utility scale issues with all of the change that's pending.
And that's something, that's a good point, is the smart city. That smart city is that bridging coalition. Within Urbanova and Avista, we have funded as part of a Clean Energy Fund grant from the state of Washington, a project that is we call it the micro-transactive grid. And that's where we have coupled within our university district, which is the focus area for our Urbanova Smart City. We're going to be putting in two distributed generation, distributed microgrid systems, and working with the Urbanova partners between McKinstry with the building management system and Avista, the university where this is located, and vendors like Itron and Schweitzer Engineering. We're going to be exploring, how do we work with these different microgrids in this type of environment? How can we optimize, the load side for the customers and the efficiencies that they gain? But when it's connected to the grid, how can we optimize the overall solution, both for the customers on their side and for the overall stability and efficiency of the grid? And then the National Labs, Pacific National Labs, is supporting in a transactive energy model, looking at how do you get the valuation of those energy services, and how does that factor into the operation of these microgrids? So that is, that all is the power of that experiment, that living lab, that proof of concept is elevated by the partnerships that the smart city has been able to bring to the forefront.
And Teresa, can I add one thing?
Sure.
I think it's also important to recognize when you do have this many stakeholders, how important it is to listen and to respect the different voices, because people are coming, you might have the same general end goal, but the reason that everyone's at the table is a little different. Mm-hmm. So you just reminded me of this. We're working closely with Duke Energy on a microgrid in our smart district, and of course they're looking at the business model, right? That's one of the reasons that they're looking at it, where that isn't necessarily our main driver, but we have to respect that when they're suggesting making changes or doing something different or going a completely different way, even though it might not be our first choice. So I think that willing to compromise and still keep that end goal in mind, but recognize you might not have a straight path there is extremely important.
Okay. All right. Great.
Great point.
Well, did you have something else, Sherlyn? No. Okay. All right. So I'm going to shift a little bit here and talk about revenue models for utilities. I mean, I think it's common knowledge, at least to those of us in the industry, that customers are becoming more energy efficient. Customers are beginning, in some cases, to generate their own electricity. I mean, the demand for electricity in a lot of places for a lot of the traditional utilities is dropping or at least staying flat. And in the past, of course, utilities have made their money by charging for kilowatt hours. So that's beginning to change a little bit, especially now that we have smart meters and controls. So obviously utilities are gaining a little bit of ground there, and their ability to be a little more responsive to what customers are wanting. But this is obviously, as you just mentioned, changing the revenue model, the business model for utilities. So again, I guess for Jim, since Avista is the utility. So given that you're using smart grid technology and the model is shifting for the rate base to an on-demand type of model, what are some of the new revenue models you're seeing emerge in response to the elimination of just a flat rate?
Sure. So it's I think that first and foremost at Vista and all utilities, the customer is our focus, and for the variety of reasons, whether it's environmental, economic, I think personalized choice is something that is going to be growing demand from the customer base. It's no longer will it be just when I flip my switch, I'm happy that the light shows up. It's where are those electrons coming from? Can I produce those electrons, and can I do that? So the world is changing for the culture that we have in terms of energy use, and so because of that, like you say, the regulatory environment likely will have to evolve too. As regulators, they're there to make sure that the customers get what they need. So again, the customer is going to be driving a lot of this. With the new technology out there, whether it's the smart meters we have or other things, we have much more visibility into what the customer is using, when they're using it, and that offers opportunities for doing things differently. Customers now are putting their own solar battery systems on their side that they now have. They're asking questions like, well, I can use this energy, but what if I have excess capacity? Can I engage in this? So I think there's traditional things or things that people have been looking at, such as time of use and demand response, that provide some granularity, some ability to move beyond just here's the rate that you have all the time. Beyond that, I think as we look into microgrids and personal supply, you could start to look at are there ancillary services that these new DER resources could be adding to the system in terms of reliability, in terms of actually helping the grid stabilize. Are there rate structures that it could be based on those types of services? Not sure, but that may be something to look. And I think one of the most exciting and potentially innovative things out there is this notion of a transactive energy, a local energy market where, yes, I do have a battery, a solar system, and I have excess capacity, and I'd like to sell it to my neighbor who happens to need some right now. And can the utilities and the technology help facilitate that level of very personal choice on what we're doing there? And I think there's multiple there's research and multiple experiments and pilots around those types of things, and I think that's where the potential changes are going to be moving towards.
Okay, so you talked about a little bit about regulation. I mean, I hear a lot of times that regulators really aren't keeping up with technology, and they're not keeping up with what customers want. I guess a lot of that, I'm assuming, or I know, depends on where you are in the country, what state you're in, that sort of thing. But for you all, are you seeing any promising regulatory models out there, or anything like that you can share with us?
So I'll admit I'm not on our regulatory side of the business, but I think from my exposure to the overall business, I think that there is the belief and there's signs that the regulators are asking new questions, right? Certainly, some states are moving down towards a more mandated sort of approach. We're going to be pushing for green technology. We're going to be setting certain minimum requirements and focusing there. So I think in general, somewhat removed from the detail of those discussions, it seems that there is the initiative on the regulatory side to be looking at this differently.
Okay, great.
There's some great work that's going on. NARUC has hosted smart city workshops. EEI is now leading, bringing together a smart city forum within that to really drive education and awareness. We see regulators often asking us as a partner to educate them. They want to see the technology. They want to come up to speed. They're trying to do the right thing. And I think what's increasingly becoming more evident is that when done well, these initiatives, whether it's extended smart city initiative that the utilities are doing, or innovation around smart grid or smart customer or smart water, it's not only good investment, so it can lower the cost for the utility in some ways, but it's good for citizens. And it can be equally beneficial across the board. So I think we're transitioning into an era now of, how do we do it? How do you solve net metering, for example? So I think we're going from the question whether it's a good idea stage to now what are the intricacies of how do you set up the right rate structures? How do you create models where utilities are incented to drive efficiencies? And how do you find ways that consumers can start benefiting for some of these technologies? And I think we're seeing across the board, and in states that are progressive, whether it's New York or Massachusetts or Washington State, we're seeing that innovation in regulatory immediately drives more velocity in what's getting rolled out, and California certainly. Right. So there is a link between regulatory support and how fast technology could adopt. But holistically, I think we're seeing all the right signs that as an industry we all recognize, all including regulators, that things need to change.
Moving forward.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Slow.
Right.
Slower than we'd all like,
right.
Trust me.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk, I want you to talk just a few minutes about data, because obviously with smart meters and all the sensors that are being installed out there on the distribution network, like you were talking about microgrids, DER, all those things being added and kind of being monitored. Obviously, there's a lot of data out there that we haven't had before. So in your opinion, what are some of the ways in which utilities and cities can benefit and share from some of this disparate data that they may have? And then the second question is, what are some of the challenges and best practices in working through kind of the change management to leverage this data effectively across an organization? What are your experiences or your thoughts on that?
One of the things that Itron saw as a real benefit to the Urbanova example was early on it was recognized that the data model and how we share data is the first thing we need to tackle. So there's a working group, Washington State University, I believe, is leading that part of the working group. Jim can chime in as well, of that data model and how that happens. And again, the advantage of not having one stakeholder like a utility drive this, or the city, but have the entity that has the stakeholders all together in both governance as well as working groups, set those rules and create that together is, I think, a best practice and one way to approach it. Certainly, I think that those are some of the hardest parts when we say collaboration is key or breaking down the silos. You get into this area, and that's where the rubber meets the road. Whose IP is it? How do you protect the data? Who gets access to the data? Should we monetize the data? Those are all the things that it's the devil's in the details, and that's where the hard work really has to come into play. And go back to point one, you have to have the right leadership so people are empowered to make the right decisions, and that that stakeholders are aligned on what that end prize is, so you can make the right decisions.
Yeah, I would. I think within Urbanova, maybe it's fair to characterize as that we have kind of a data-first sort of approach to things, and because of the importance of that data, and the importance comes from the diverse sources of data, the different types of data that you have, and what you can do when you combine that data together to achieve greater efficiencies, higher level outcomes by taking data from different sources. So it's critical to the smart city and the success of trying to achieve its goals. As Sherilyn said, in Urbanova we actually created a governance model for data, and we have a process flow for as we are looking at adding new devices or adding new data into our collective, our data platform. We go through a process to ask those questions that Sherilyn mentioned, around the IP and the privacy and security. And so there's a very deliberate process that's been defined for how we're going to do that. There's also within Urbanova, the heart of the common work that we're doing is a shared information platform, and that's the place where we have the access to go there and use that data, combine it with the different partners. Potentially citizens can come in and have access to that data. But again, that just speaks to the importance of the governance, so that we aren't sharing information to somebody that we shouldn't be sharing that information to.
Yeah, I'll talk a bit about the non-utility side data, and that's the human data, right? So one of the things that one of the challenges that we've had really early on is we've started working in the smart district with our residents and our neighbors, their fear of data we're collecting related to them and how that's going to be used. And very much a sense, very much of the big brother syndrome. So one of the projects I mentioned earlier is our Smart Homes project, which has a very similar goal to the Envision project. We want to work with residents to help them understand their utility bills and then bring in data and technology to hopefully lower those. So we have a partnership with the city, with Duke Energy, Amazon, and Intel, and then a local energy efficiency nonprofit to work with the residents to do it. And one of the first questions we got when we started talking about putting all these smart devices in the home is, are you going to hear everything I say? Are you going to be tracking me? Can I? This one funny guy mentioned, do I have to cover the device when I'm kissing my wife? So we're able to bring to the table, because we have those relationships, we have developed that trust, what the end users for some of this stuff are thinking. Right. So we developed a survey early on to get their initial feedback, and as we go through, as we install the technology, as they use it, we'll continue to work with these 40 homes that are piloting this project to see how's it working. Are you comfortable? Did something happen or not happen that you were expecting? So I think again, as utilities look toward a new business model, recognizing that the consumer is the ultimate decision maker on whether something's working or not, that's something that we can bring to the table because we have the boots on the ground in the neighborhoods.
Very cool. You'll have to circle back and see if he can still smooch his wife.
Yeah, well, he didn't seem too deterred.
Right. Right. Well, I think that's very interesting, and I think that's something that still, I know utilities are certainly much more focused on the customer than they once were, but it's still the type of information that you probably don't think of unless you're right out there with the customer and they're asking you those questions. So that's interesting. Okay, so I'm going to ask one last question before we open it up to our audience for their questions. But so obviously, there's a lot of exciting possibilities when it comes to smart cities. I wish my city was smarter than it is. We're just now getting digital meters, and I'm pretty excited about that and all everything that it can entail. But so far, it's just really my bill just looks a little different, and everything else is the same. But I'm sure that's going to change. But so when you all envision being a resident of a community, and maybe the not so distant future, a smart city, what are you most excited about?
For me as a citizen, I get really excited when I think about more of a stress-free commute. How can I find a parking spot downtown because I'm always running late, quicker? How can I not smell stinky trash when I'm walking around New York City? I hate that, so that if they could have smarter, pick up the garbage when it's full or so that sit there and stink in the summer. So there's things like that, I think, as citizens, that our cities will become less stressful. They'll be cleaner. And I think our cities will run more efficient, and that's good for everybody. I think we could all stop wasting as much water and as much energy, and better protect our environment, and having more confidence that we, not only as citizens but as cities, are doing our part would be something I'd be incredibly excited about. And I can't wait to see more. I know in Spokane, where I'm a resident and a Vista customer and work for Itron, I'm part of Urbanova, we're going to tackle health. And we've got big initiatives and vision for the community a 2020 vision around life sciences and driving healthier citizens, so air quality and improving our citizens' life in that area. I look forward to figuring out. We're doing some great studies, working with Gallup, to find ways that we could use the smart connected information, the data that we got to figure out how to make available to solve some of those challenges. So there's a lot of things to be excited about. I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things to be excited about. One in particular, which is the opportunity to start bringing more access to more people and to really focus on equality. So the Smart District is made up of 8 neighborhoods that tend to be some of Charlotte's most disenfranchised, disadvantaged neighborhoods. So when you look at the different projects we're working on, one that excites me the most is bridging the digital divide. So how are we bringing the technology and connectivity to people who, it's a big challenge. For most people in this room, it's probably not a big challenge to have a smartphone or a computer and have your connectivity, but for a lot of the folks that we're dealing with on a daily basis, it is a big challenge. And then not only bringing them the devices and the connectivity, but then what do you do with it? What world are you opening up to people? And that's from the student who can now email their teacher and access study guides online, to the 70 or 80-year-old who might be able to communicate with their doctor or order food online as well. So in large part, this lens is driven from Charlotte being recognized as one of the worst cities in the country for economic mobility. There was a study that came out several years ago that put us dead last of the 50 largest cities. So if you're born into poverty in Charlotte, you have a 0.4% chance of making it out of poverty when you hit adulthood. So that's I think what gets me the most excited about this is really being able to reach out to a segment of our population who really, if it's done right, could really benefit from it.
Yeah, I'd like to say I'm just excited about the whole thing, but I think that
Curing world hunger.
That's right. Yeah, I'll get there.
Part.
Yeah,
okay.
But I think it's as I look at the different technologies that are coming together and the different factors around the environment and some of the economic concerns that you have raised, that the smart city of the future is going to be a group of people that are working together to optimize all of those things for the better. And there's a certain amount of energy, I think, that comes from being part of that sort of culture that, when we have the cool smart parking meters and we aren't dealing with traffic and we aren't having air quality problems and people can be upwardly mobile, we can live together in a much more efficient way. And I think once we solve those problems, then our attention isn't focused on the basics of running our different siloed systems. We can band together and solve even tougher problems and focus our energy beyond those types of things. And I think we talked about there's the technology that's coming on board is the fourth industrial revolution, and that's great. We're going to use that technology, and I have no doubt we're going to be successful at doing that. And what I hope is that by doing that, we'll usher in kind of a second renaissance. We will have a dramatic rise in the advances in science and arts and humanities, and keep building on this collaboration as we all grow together. So.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
All right, so that's it for our discussion here. So do we have any questions in our live audience? I have several here from the online audience, but is there anybody out in our live audience that would like to ask a question? There's a gentleman right up here. Right up here, Tom. And if you would, tell us your name and where you're from when you ask your question.
My name is Femi Oshidele. I live here in San Antonio. I have a question that's for Rob, but any of the panelists can also join in. I'm going to make a very quick plug for San Antonio because just last June, the newly elected mayor essentially effectively signed a declaration enlisting San Antonio as one of the major cities also supporting the Paris Climate Agreement. And the host utility happens to be one of the, I'll call them the financial and also utility champions for San Antonio's efforts in that direction. But my question for Rob is really regarding, is there any forum for collaboration across, like regional or national collaboration across cities to share experiences and lessons learned in the various smart city initiatives?
Yeah, there are. One that comes to mind is Envision Charlotte. So Envision Charlotte has, and this will be, I think, the third year, hosted a national conference. This year it's going to be international, that brings cities and companies together to have these dialogues. And it's the format's changing a bit this year. It's the conference is going to be called By Cities, For Cities. It's going to be in June. In the past, what it's done is cities have applied to be able to work with a cohort of companies on a specific problem. And it's going to be similar, but there'll be an opportunity for more cities to participate and more opportunities for people to really learn from the cities, thus the By Cities, For Cities. So that's one. There's also another group called the Smart Cities Council that really started off as an industry-focused group. I think it still is very heavily industry-focused, but just recognizing how smart cities has evolved, it too recognizes the role that the kind of the more the human element of it as well. And then, I just know, I can't remember them now, but I follow them on Twitter. There are certain organizations that are just constantly putting out information, like City Lab is one. So I get my daily news feed from them. But I think again, it also is industry specific. I think for cities, Envision Charlotte has really led the way. But then I'm sure there are forums on the energy side, on the water side, on the whatever side of it as well. I'll show you my Twitter feed afterward if you want to.
And I'll just throw in a little plug for DistribuTECH. We do have a Smart Cities track for the last couple of years, so we're trying to advance that as well. So do we have another question right over here? And then I'll take one from online after this one.
Yes, Lee Bird with CPS Energy. You mentioned that the utilities are becoming the provider for the smart city network, kind of the basis. Is there a cost-sharing model that is emerging? Is it by endpoints? Is it based on data? Is it an add-on to services, or is it just a cost of getting into the business?
One of the things that we're seeing is it's potentially all of the above, but I don't think a model has really ironed out. We have a lot of utilities that are looking at how to do this and are still trying to figure this out. So I think all is up. Some of the models are, how do you just offer it as a service? We will do X for you, and we'll charge as a service. How does that work if you're regulated? Do you have to do that through a non-regulated side of the business? You're sharing assets, but then offering a revenue-generating service. So a lot of that still needs to be ironed out. I think that's the only reason we're not seeing more sharing than's been done, because there's a lot of intentions across the board. It is a trend. We'll figure it out, but I don't think the model has emerged yet. So.
I would agree. I think that business model, that's one of those innovation challenges / innovation opportunities that we have. Within Urbanova, one of the things on our docket this year to be looking at, starting the discussions, is a shared AMI model between the city of Spokane and Avista as we're rolling out a AMI system for our electric and gas meters. So even there, we're starting the discussions, but we don't have the answer yet. Mm-hmm. But in the spirit of the living laboratory, we'll be doing some exploration.
And I'll just add, in Charlotte, we're having a similar discussion about the shared AMI network. But I'm really interested to see what the result of an RFP we have on the street right now for digital kiosks. So these are starting to pop up in cities. They're kind of like big interactive iPads. Well, I guess iPads are interactive, but in the right of way. Dallas has them now. New York City has them. Denver's putting them in. I think San Diego is moving toward it. But I think as opposed to some of the first ones that came out, what I'm expecting to see is a more, not just one company, but partnerships that are forming for that reason. I mean, the model that I've seen is that very often the media sale on these are paying for them. That's the revenue. So cities don't have to put the upfront capital in. Whoever will put them in, they'll make their money back, and there might be a revenue sharing. But once you start putting in, if Itron's getting involved in that, Avista's starting to get involved in it, how do you start sharing that as well? So I think, as the technology progresses, I think the models are going to have to continue to change with it as well.
For sure.
All right. Well, that
No, okay, just agreeing.
All right. I was going to say that kind of segues into a question I have here from the online audience. It says, does a smart city include things like electric vehicle charging stations, and what other consumer apps would be considered part of a smart city? So,
certainly, I think we would categorize electric vehicles as part of and charging stations as part of the smart city umbrella. Certainly, that we have that activity happening at Avista. So I think just as part of that energy economy and the different types of systems that we use to evolve our energy delivery, that falls into it. Some of the other use cases we have is around the streetlights, smart streetlights, air quality sensors, traffic sensors, optimizing traffic light, traffic patterns. That's a sample of some of the different things that we're utilizing. And then I mentioned earlier, this shared information platform. We will be working on putting that together as an Urbanova service, maybe. So that's something that the partners could use, something that potentially startups or others could use to kind of bootstrap their activities in developing new smart city applications.
right. I'm sure there's a lot out there we haven't even thought of yet that are going to come up.
Get the students on it as well.
That's right.
That's right, yeah.
All right. I think we have time for probably one more question. We're getting close to the top of the hour, but I'm going to do one more here from our online audience. And this one says, do you see an opportunity for blockchain technology to provide the smart technology interface for applications like distributed energy trading, that sort of thing? Are you guys looking at any of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just so smart. We don't want to share.
Right. Yeah.
At Itron, we have an innovation lab, and that's one of the topics that we're investigating. It has great potential. As we look at a more transactive energy model, it all goes together. So it's a little bit out on the horizon, right?
Right.
But you certainly look at some of the characteristics around security and smart contracts and those things. It plays well to the type of activities that we're talking about.
Right. So. Okay. All right. Great. Well, I think that's probably about all the time we have. Like I said, we're almost at the top of the hour. I want to thank all three of our panelists for participating. This was a great discussion. We appreciate you all coming, and for those of you who are on the call on the online webcast, we appreciate you taking your time to spend an hour with us. Again, thanks to Itron for sponsoring this. They've always been a great supporter of DistribuTECH, and we really appreciate that. So that concludes our webcast. And again, thanks for coming, and you guys have a great day.